Hey guys, what's up? My name is Cole Sears and I am here to talk about manual settings, okay? Now, switching that dial to the M can be daunting at first. It can be hard, it can be challenging, but it's every bit of worth it because you can have 100% control of your image. Now, first, let's talk about why you should shoot manual and not auto. When you shoot auto, your camera does the work. When you shoot manual, you do the work. Think about that for a second. Now imagine you just took the greatest image you've ever taken, but you shot it on auto. Everybody's asking you, oh, how'd you take that image? How'd you get that? That was such a cool moment. How'd you catch it so fast? You're just like, well, I don't know, my camera did it. Now imagine you shot it in manual. Your friends ask you the same exact question. They're like, oh, how'd you get that shot? How'd you get it? It's so cool. And you say, well, I knew I had to freeze the moment, so I made my shutter speed to about 1/500th of a second. I also knew that it would be hard to catch the focus, so I made sure to stop down in my aperture a little bit. I just adjusted my ISO until I figured it was a good enough exposure and I shot it, and I guess I just got lucky this time, but I put the work in to make sure I set it up right. Your friends are just staring at you like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but you sound so much more smarter. And you can take so much more pride in that image knowing that you created that. You were the one that put all the settings together and got it. So I'm going to be teaching you guys how to do that with all of your images. So let's get started. Part 1, we are going to define the settings, what they mean, what they are. Let's go. Shutter speed is how long your sensor is open to light. Okay? It's usually given a number, whether it's 500, 100, 125, or you'll see a 30 with a quotation mark after it. Now, if it has a quotation mark after it, that's the amount of seconds. Other than that, it's a fraction of a second. So think, if you see 100, it's 1/100th of a second. The longer your light sensor is open to light, the brighter your exposure will be. So 30 seconds will give you a brighter image than 15 seconds will, or 10 seconds, or 5 seconds, and so on and so forth down the line. A faster shutter speed, not only does it make a darker image, but it can freeze action. So if you're out shooting sports and you want to freeze action at a basketball or football game, you want to have your shutter speed at about 300 or 400 at least. But imagine you're shooting stars and you want to get star trails. Now, doing 1/500th of a second, it's too dark for that. You can't do that. Sometimes people leave their exposures open for 40 minutes at a time to catch the light trails. It's super cool, it's beautiful, I recommend trying it, by the way. Making your shutter speed too slow can cause blurriness to show up in your photo. Even if it's not out of focus, it's called camera shake. It's when the shutter speed is too slow that even just the slight movement of your hands makes things shake and it looks kind of weird, okay? Now on the opposite end of the spectrum, if your shutter speed is too fast, you have to crank up your ISO and it'll get super, super noisy, or things will kind of look warped if you're using a mirrorless camera sometimes. It just depends on what your other settings are. Here's how I pick my shutter speed about 90% of the time. Take the focal length of your lens, so 35 millimeters, 55 millimeters, 100 millimeters, whatever that is, okay? Now if you're using a crop sensor body, multiply it by 1.6. If you're using a full frame, leave it alone. Then I want you to double that, and that should be your shutter speed. If it's not an exact number to a stop, just go 1/3 of a stop over, okay? That should be your shutter speed with that lens. That can almost guarantee, unless you have extremely shaky hands, that you won't get motion blur. Aperture is not inside your camera like the shutter speed. Even though you control it from your camera, it's not actually in your camera, it's in the lens. As you've probably seen some lenses that go to f1.4, 1.2, even some that go to 1.0. That is an extremely wide aperture, and that brings in a lot of light. Like I said earlier, the lower the number in your aperture, the brighter your image will be. But you will have a thinner plane of focus. So if you look at the video right now, my aperture right now is 5.6. Now I did that because I can't see my screen very well, but I want to make sure I'm in crisp focus. So I set it to 5.6, so I have a lot bigger margin of error. So if I miss focus just slightly, it won't be that big of a deal because I stuffed my aperture down. Have you ever seen those images where the background is just super, super blurry and it looks really, really nice? That's the result of a very low aperture. such as a 2.8, 2.2, 2, 1.8, 1.4 even. Also, I know you've seen images where the background isn't as out of focus and it's kind of just everything sharp. That's when you have an aperture like 22 or 20 or 16 or 12 even sometimes, or 11. I don't think 12 is an actual number. The larger your f-stop number, the larger plane of focus you have. I recommend finding an aperture that your camera can consistently find focus with. Now, with my lenses, I have all prime lenses, so mine can go super wide, right? So I pretty much have my aperture set to 2.2 about 99.99% of the time. Most lenses have a sweet spot of aperture, right where it just gets crisp and it's pretty. I mean, on this 35mm lens that I have right here, its sweet spot is about 2 to 2.8, and it's crisp and it's buttery, and I love it, right? Each lens has its own sweet spot like that. Now, if you don't know where the sweet spot of your lens, try this. Open it wide open, okay? So if you have a 1.8 lens, open it all the way to 1.8. And then what I want you to do is stop down a stop on your aperture. Now, if you don't know what that means, is just click your aperture wheel or use your finger to slide it over 3 clicks, and that's a full stop. Then start messing around with that. Start using your camera in different situations, whether it's tracking something really fast like a cat or your child or your friend. And just try to figure out that sweet spot. Play around with it, okay? Once you find that sweet spot, you will be in love with that lens. No matter how cheap, expensive that lens is, you will love it because you have found out how to use that lens to its maximum capability. ISO is very controversial and it's hard to understand. Now, it is basically fake light. You are making your camera sensor more sensitive to light to bring more in. There's not really much to be said about it. All you should know, higher number, brighter image. Lower number, darker image. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, I know what shutter speed is, I know what aperture is now, and now I know what ISO is. I don't really know how it works, but I know what it is and how to use it. But how do I put these all into one image? I'll show you. So, I want you right now to pull out your camera. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, now that you have your camera out, I want you to put your shutter speed to 1/125th of a second. Okay, now that you've done that, I want you to open your aperture all the way up, as wide as your lens can go. Whether it's 1.8 or 3.5, I don't care, just open it all the way up. Next, if you're using a DSLR, I want you to look through the viewfinder and point it at something. If you're using a mirrorless, just look at the screen, and what I want you to do is I want you to adjust your ISO until your light meter, which if you're using a DSLR, is the thing right in the bottom right here. You'll see a 0, you'll see a 1 on either side, a 2 on either side, and a 3 on either side. And what I want you to do is I want you to adjust that until that bar gets to the 0. And that's how you know you've exposed something right. Now, mirrorless users, you guys have it easy. All I want you to do is make sure the image looks good in your screen or viewfinder, whichever one you're using. Now that you've done that, I want you to just click the shutter and take a picture. Congratulations, you have just taken your first manual exposure. Mark this day. This is a special day because today is the day that you have learned how to use your light meter and all of the functions to create an image. Now we'll go into more detail on how to use your gear to your advantage, even if you're on a tight budget, and how to set your settings when you get in a weird lighting situation. But for now, just practice your manual exposure. Just set your shutter speed, how I told you to do it earlier, and set your aperture, and then just adjust your ISO so that it looks nice, or until that line is at the 0. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you learned something about how to put your manual exposure together. Now, I want you to go use your knowledge in the field. Go outside, go grab a friend and start playing with the manual exposure. Happy shooting. I'll see you guys later.